Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be talking about the question of infanticide. Now, infanticide is simply the murder of an infant. So you would think there's hardly anything to talk about, and yet there's been a history of this sort of action throughout past history, and some would argue still ongoing. The history of infanticide goes all the way back to the practice among many pagan civilizations of child sacrifice. The Canaanites, for example, would had different traditions about sacrificing either a child in time of great need. At other times, it would be the firstborn child that would be sacrificed. The child would be taken and killed and offered upon an altar. Moses, and at the time of his birth, and the Pharaoh, remember the Pharaoh of Egypt, unnamed, um, has a policy in place in which he's trying to downsize the Hebrew population, and he's ordering that the newborn children, all those newborn males, be thrown into the Nile River. And Moses himself is taken, not thrown just into the river, but placed into a basket, maybe with a babysitter in place so that he won't drift away. But that wasn't the intent of the ruling. The intent was to put children to death. The intent was in infanticide. Sargon the Great, there's a tradition around him where supposedly he was taken and cast adrift. This is sort of you think, well, that's an unusual sort of story. But no, the ancient world was full of stories like this because it was regularly practiced. And it happened to be that he was found by Aki the water drawer, who took him and raised him as his own son. The story of Romulus and Remus is another one where two babies were cast adrift that they might just be. It was just an easy way of putting them to death. And the story goes that they were found by a she-wolf and suckled, and then later on found by a farmer who raised them as his own. But again, it reflects a historical reality that was taking place back in those days. Greek and Roman practices were such that not a child who was already born might be taken and abandoned if the father, you had, especially in Rome, the right of pater familias, that is, the father could have the right to say, no, I don't want this child, just take it and expose it. And among the Greeks, especially among the Spartans, but among all the Greeks, this was at times carried out, especially for a child that might not be considered desirable. Maybe if a child had some sort of defect, then that child would be taken and exposed and put to death. Herod the Great, in Matthew chapter 2, we're told that because he was trying to put any threat to his throne aside, that he ordered the extermination of all children 2 years old and under in the little town of Bethlehem. Now, that town was so small that his action actually doesn't make it into the pages of Josephus. It was considered sort of a non-event. Well, not by the people that were living there. I'm sure it was a tragic event, but was not recorded in Josephus. And yet the Bible records that event. And frankly, it sounds very much like Herod when you see some of the other things that he did. Infanticide was made illegal by Constantine. Whether you like Constantine or hate him, he's the first emperor who openly declared himself to be a Christian. And from this time on, now infanticide became illegal, where people were not allowed to put their children to death. And that was largely due to his Christian influence. Until recently, partial birth abortion had been an issue in which a child, not always full term, sometimes maybe in the 20th or 24th week, but what you would have is the child begins to be delivered, and then before the child actually comes completely out of the womb, a doctor reaches in and does like a last minute, you could call it, dress this up and call it a surgical operation. Actually, he reaches in with a pair of forceps and kills the child. And and then reaches in with some sort of suction device and sucks the brains out. It was, you know, it's been declared illegal in a number of states within the United States. To the best of my knowledge, there are still some states that allow this action to take place, and it could be argued that this is infanticide. In fact, of course, it could be argued that any abortion could be infanticide. In the Journal of Medical Ethics, one of the 2011 issues, I don't remember exactly which issue, I've looked it up and posted it on Populi for those students that are watching this video. Two doctors argued for what they called after-birth abortion. Gubellini and Minerva. This is an academic article, and the article was meant for academic purposes. In other words, it was other doctors that were reading this. They weren't, putting this in their local newspaper. And they argued that when you look at fetal development all the way up to birth, that nothing is once birth has taken place, that baby hasn't changed dramatically from when the baby was in the womb. And they said, look, if it was okay to abort the baby in the womb, it should be okay to kill the baby now that the baby's out of the womb, because nothing really has changed. The moral significance of fetal development is arbitrary. So if it was okay to kill that baby while it was in the womb, then it's okay to kill the baby now that the baby's outside of the womb. A new baby, they argued, is not a person. Now, to be fair to them, they said this was later they got such kickback, both in the journal from peer-reviewed articles that were peer-reviewed responses, I should say, that came back to them, but also this began to make waves outside of the medical community and just among regular people. They said, well, we weren't really serious. We were just doing an academic exercise. Whether that's true or not, that was the response they came back with. But they said, the rights of the mother outweigh the value of the child. That's been maintained in a number of countries, and even in this country since Roe versus Wade. And so they said, what's the difference? Hey, you might as well kill. Now, they weren't arguing to kill your 11-year-old child, but they were saying that when a baby's first born, that those same criteria of awareness, and that child still has to develop some before he's going to be a talking and thinking and rational, self-conceptualizing human being. And they said there is no difference. So, and they were coming from the position that abortion is okay. So it's okay to go ahead and take that child and to murder it. Infanticide, they were saying, is okay. By contrast, the Bible tells the story of once when there were those who were bringing babies to Jesus. We read in Luke chapter 18, beginning verse 15. They were bringing even their babies to him so that he would touch them. But when the disciples saw it, they began rebuking them. But Jesus called for them, saying, permit the children, and the term earlier is actually babies, infants. Permit the children to come to me, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. That is, we have to become, in a sense, like a baby. We have to become helpless and admit our helplessness. And he goes on to say, truly I say to you, whoever does not receive the kingdom of God like a child will not enter it at all. The gospel is all about becoming like a baby. And Jesus warned that one who mistreats one of these little ones, it's better for him to carry out capital punishment upon himself, to have a millstone tied about his neck and throw himself into the sea. So that Jesus valued babies.